Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Red Bull might not be the same team they used to be. That does not mean they're excluded from drama. Sergio Perez will be back on the grid in a few weeks' time, and that means he is back in the media telling everything about what happened behind the scenes at Red Bull during his tenure at that team, implying that there was some serious sabotage happening to that second seat with him and also his successors in Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda this most recent season. Also a few interesting comments on Max Verstappen's character. Lots of controversy in these comments we're going to get into the either side of today. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We are 3 weeks away from the start of pre-season testing. We have a couple of new dates when the cars are going to be confirmed. 22nd of January, Mercedes are going to reveal the W17. Now, we're not sure, of course, with these announcements, what they're actually going to show us, right? Are they going to show us the real car? Although, let's be honest, if you reveal a car on the 22nd of January at the start of a new regulation cycle, it's going to be a rather different looking car 2 months later at the first race in Melbourne, and even in testing shortly after that. Potentially as a result of that, Williams have confirmed they're only going to show us the livery, and they're going to show us it on the 3rd of February, which is interesting because their car will already have been on track in Barcelona before then. But as we understand, some of the teams, potentially not all of the teams, will be bringing very different versions of the cars between the Barcelona test in a few weeks' time, then what we see in Bahrain, and then what turns up to Melbourne. These are the dates we have. So, the 15th of January is when both Red Bulls are going to be revealed, and also Racing Bulls is kind of what I was going for. Audi, then Mercedes, Haas and Alpine, and Ferrari, all on the 23rd of January. Ferrari will be the key one to watch there because they're probably going to drive it around Fiorano. Then the others are going to wait until after that pre-season test in Barcelona because, well, that's behind closed doors in theory, but I'm sure there might be some pictures circulating. McLaren, we simply don't know as of yet. The other Ferrari dates to keep in mind, the 17th and the 18th of January are going to be the seat-fitting date to both of their drivers. Leclerc on the 17th, Hamilton on the 18th, with their first run at Fiorano a few days later. Worthy of note, though, Ferrari have made it very clear they are not going to be bringing the same car. Their intention for testing in Barcelona is a very early spec car, test that the active aero works, test that the engine doesn't blow up, that type of stuff. Then bring the real thing to the upcoming test and still have plenty of time. That does not appear to be the approach of every single team, as we'll see in a second. But speaking of Ferrari, former Ferrari reserve driver Zhou Guanyu was officially confirmed today. This had been heavily hinted by Cadillac themselves to be a Cadillac driver, so he's their reserve. We're going to talk about Sergio Perez in a second. It's Perez, Bottas and Zhou. That will be the trio. This makes a fair bit of sense. I think Cadillac sell more cars in China. Certainly they have a big market in China. General Motors in general, it's a big market for them. So it actually makes quite a lot of sense this. Look, do I think Zhou's ever getting a starting seat at Cadillac? Probably not. But do I think this move makes sense to both parties? Quite possibly, yes. As I say, in the coming weeks, things are going to get real serious. We also have some potential private tests, right? So some filming days before pre-season testing, which some teams are going to do. Again, as I say, that will be pretty early version cars and quite possibly rather different cars to what we will be seeing turn up and actually racing in Melbourne, but that is expected over the coming days. So things are getting real tasty right now. Paul Monahan, though, from Red Bull says in this first sentence, really, that it's going to be a rush to get everything ready for Barcelona. We will not be bringing 2 different versions of the car. So that is an interesting assessment because other teams reportedly will be doing so. Red Bull don't really want to do that. They want to have a version of their chassis which is not final for sure, but is not going to be like an A spec, which is basically a demo car with an engine in to test it in Barcelona. And that might be what some teams do within reason. However, Red Bull, it seems, are going to have certainly more of an A spec that they will intend to keep roughly similar. The other Red Bull update is on Will Courtenay. This is a pretty big deal. And again, I feel like this is maybe a symptom of the changes that have happened at Red Bull in recent years. I don't know if you feel the same way. But Will Courtenay was poached, basically, by McLaren. He was their top strategy guy. He's now joining McLaren as their sporting director. So, look, how important this will be for McLaren remains to be seen. Obviously, a big loss for Red Bull on paper, although, with Hannah Schmidt on the strategy side, they're still in very good hands. The point is, however, that Courtenay was on a substantial gardening leave period from Red Bull, and under Horner, I have a very hard time believing, unless there was big money involved, they would have negotiated an early end to that. But it was confirmed here that actually Courtenay has already started work with McLaren. His contract was expected to end in a few months' time, as in his gardening leave. He was not meant to be joining McLaren for another few months. But Red Bull and McLaren have clearly agreed something, which means he can start early. So, look, I don't know if Horner was still there, if this would have happened, but I don't know. Things seem to have changed. It feels a little bit interesting that Red Bull would just kind of allow, because this didn't necessarily have to be the case, right? They had a long gardening leave period on him. They probably could have forced him in a way to stay on the sidelines for another 6 months. Not to say that would be good for him or good for McLaren. Obviously, it wouldn't be, but that's business, baby, and that's certainly competition and motorsport. So that's that update on that one anyway. The other quick update before we discuss Perez is on the 2026 regs. There's increasing talk about the importance of using the energy deployment correctly. Much bigger batteries, pretty much 47% of the 1,000 roughly horsepower is generated from the electrical motor, and, well, recovering that much charge during a lap is a challenge. It's frankly the reason why we have the active aero, but also it means the drivers will be managing their deployment at a level far beyond where they are today. The implication is that we may have overtakes that happen just on the straight, drive-by passes, because someone's just deployed the energy and the other guy's got none left. Now, managing that is not all on the driver. The teams can do stuff from the pit wall, but it is in large part on the driver. So there's a feeling that drivers with, as is described, high IQ and levels of adaptability will be the best at optimizing. And many of the drivers in the simulators, initially they were somewhat confused by the new technique of driving. There's even talk about the necessity, let's say, through corners. You might want to, gear up through a corner and rev more than you would need to, just because by doing so, you can generate a bit more energy for your battery. So there's, you might actually drive suboptimally with the car, with the ICE, in order that you can use it to generate a bit more power that you can deploy electrically down the straight to go for the overtake. So it's going to get kind of technical. Look, in my head, I'm thinking Alonso should be pretty good at this, but I will say, pretty much every driver, every fan of every driver, is hitting the timeline now saying, okay, yeah, my driver really smart, all the other drivers are idiots, they're going to be the best, right? So, look, I think it will help some drivers. Who knows what really happens when we get to the track, but yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. Now, let's talk about Red Bull Racing, because things are changing. As I said at the start of the video, it's actually kind of remarkable. These are the only 4 drivers that Red Bull have in their junior program this year. Nicola Solov is probably the most notable. He's in Formula 2. The others are in F3, but they dropped a number of drivers. This is actually the lowest number of drivers they basically ever had. So they got rid of Marco, and now their junior program is certainly not as, expansive as it previously was. Now, Sergio Perez is back on the grid with Cadillac in just a few weeks' time. His conclusion to his career as a Red Bull driver was actually the worst of anyone, if you look at by the numbers. In his last 10 races in 2024, he scored just 21 points. Tsunoda scored 23 in that same time span. Now, of course, there's loads of caveats here. There's loads of things to say, especially when we talk about Baku, which we'll get into in the coming minutes, because lots of drama on that. Tsunoda arguably had a better car than Perez did in those final races. The RB20 was challenging to set up, but so was the RB21, and there was also other things that Tsunoda was struggling with there as well. So, look, the bottom line is, this Perez drama is very controversial, and Perez, I think, does hit on a number of justifiable points. I also think, though, it's worth keeping in mind that it's not like Perez's individual performance was good towards the end of his career. Now, yes, you can put that down, not towards the end of his stint with Red Bull. Of course, his career's not over, he's coming back. Point is, getting rid of Perez, going for a different option, switching it up at Red Bull, while in hindsight, it's not made much difference, it was justifiable at the time given Perez's performance. Now, that may be due to other factors that we'll get into, but it's not just due to other factors as far as I'm concerned. Now, this is interesting timing because Gasly said something similar just the other day and said that when he was at the team, he had no support basically, and he was not given the tools to perform. He was there as the second man. Max Verstappen was the man that the team was backing to the absolute hilt. And according to Perez, that's basically exactly what Christian Horner told him. Now, Perez also gave some thoughts on Max, which I thought was pretty interesting. Now, he gives Max a lot of credit for his ability, his performance, his mentality as well. He says mentally he's super strong, impressive talent, he's very focused, is a huge force for the team, and is a great leader. The bad thing, I think, is his character. When things turn against him, he struggles to deal with it, like what happened in Barcelona, presumably he means this year when he crashed into George. He freezes up. He has that side, but I also think he wouldn't be Max if he didn't. I think that's actually very well said for Perez. A character like Max, you are going to have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And if you didn't have the devil, then the angel wouldn't be as angelic. I don't know how to best to describe it. But you often see this with characters that, I don't know, define history in certain respects, that they have good traits and bad traits, but often some can be the reflection of the other. So I think Perez is pretty on the money there. He also said something kind of interesting about what happened in Brazil back in 2022 when famously he he refused to yield position. He says, something is up with Max. Max is an excellent person, but something happens when he's up there in the car. He transforms, he's another person. And I think he was carrying something in him in Brazil that he never let out because we talked about it and thought it was behind us. The whole team thought that, so we were surprised when he let it all out. You remember when he said, well, you know, we talked about this, I'm never letting Perez past or whatever. We believe that it was because he thought that Perez deliberately crashed in Monaco that year, a race he eventually won because he was sitting ahead of Verstappen in qualifying at the time. There is actually some evidence to support that theory, I will suggest. We discussed it in depth when all the rumours came out late in that year. He also went on to say, though, about Red Bull itself, because he talked about Max a little bit, some good words, some bad words, whatever, giving his honest opinion. He also gave, to the credit of Checo here, not just to talk about the drama, really, he did say, look, Red Bull was hugely important for him. He enjoyed a lot of working with those guys and giving his all to that team, and is proud of what he accomplished with the team. However, he mostly described how things internally at Red Bull were certainly not set up for him to succeed. Being Max's teammate at Red Bull is the worst job there is in Formula 1. In my first meeting with Horner, he said to me, we are going to race with two cars, but only because we have to, right? Like, which is a pretty funny thing to say to your second driver. This team is for Max. So apparently that was made very clear to Checo immediately that this is, you know, everyone knows this, right? A lot of what Perez is saying here is not anything totally radical. Like, yes, Red Bull favour Max. They have a 1-2 setup, sure. Maybe the extent to which that is the case, at least as Perez describes, that is some of the drama. And then he went on to say, I was faster than Max until the upgrades. Now, we're talking here back in 2022, just when, well, obviously the first year in 21, then in 22, things changed around. He was faster than Max, apparently, in the simulator on the new regs. Now, Perez was pretty good at the start of 2022, but he was nothing special, right? Like, let's just put it out there. Max was still quicker than him every weekend. Eventually, Perez won in Monaco, notably, potentially because of that incident we just mentioned. But every other Grand Prix before that, I think Max was ahead of him, right? Like in Bahrain, obviously they both DNFs, they had both mechanical problems, but Max was running ahead of Perez in that race as far as I remember. Obviously he came second, Max, he won in Saudi Arabia, right, after the big battle with Charles Leclerc. Then there was a few races where obviously Leclerc won in Australia, Max had the DNF, and then Max won a good handful of Grand Prix in a row. Perez was not a million miles away, but Perez, certainly on track, was not quicker than Max. But he says, I was faster than Max in the simulator, but once the upgrades arrived, the team clearly starts going in a certain direction. So I guess maybe what he is saying is that before the season began, or very early days, he was quicker than Max in the sim. but the upgrades arrived, they went in Max's direction. Now, look, we know this is what happens, and also, did it make the car faster? Did Max win the championship that year? Did Red Bull win the Constructors? Yes, right? So, did it work? I think that's the point. You can't necessarily criticize too much Red Bull's approach here if the upgrades improve the car. So, Perez went on to say a number of things. We had a very heavy car in 2022 with a weight distribution very far forward, which made it very stable. That's what I looked for. Now, of course, at some point they were going to take the weight out. So the car was, because if the weight is at the front, then it's going to be a less snappy front end. The rear is going to be more stable naturally, which is what Perez likes. Verstappen likes the opposite. He doesn't like an understeery car with a heavy front end. So, but that was always probably going to change at some point, right? If he's saying that the weight distribution was very far forward with a heavy car, then yeah, the upgrades may have helped Max, but was that because they were trying to help Max deliberately? Even if that's true, that's probably understandable. Max has earned it, you could argue. But also, was it not inevitable that if the car was heavy at the front end and they were going to take a lot of that weight out over time, that it was naturally going to start to favour Max's style? Because they were always going to do that. But Perez says, I went into the weekend with the idea of winning the race and everything went by itself. As a driver, you didn't have to think about how you control the car. Everything went by itself. It all went well. When we had the car, perhaps not entirely in Max's style, I started to fight the championship with him. So I think he's talking a little bit more here about 2023. Further on, he says the upgrades are in Verstappen's direction, making the car less stable. I no longer know what the car will do in the corner. I think about not crashing, and then you start to crash because you think about it. And that seemed to happen to Tsunoda as well this year too. Look, I don't think Perez and Lawson and Tsunoda are as bad as the situation at the Red Bull second team makes them look, right? Like, I think there is certainly something to that. Do I think that Perez is like a sensational driver who was just sabotaged by Red Bull and that's why he was awful towards the end of his time there? No, personally. But look, I mean, I think there's a bit of nuance here. He went on to say in 2023, we split the first 4 races, which is true, right? Max won in Bahrain, Perez then won in Saudi, but that was at least in part because Max had the issue in qualifying, so he started further down the order, right? And then Max won the following race, and then it was Perez, of course, in Baku, very notably, that won that Grand Prix very impressively, and Max therefore decided he was never going to lose to him again. That was the talk anyway. So, but then when things started, again, Red Bull came with the updates, made the car less stable, I no longer had control on the car, then the pressure started, the pressure is heavy, the driver's to blame, etc, etc. He also went on to say a couple of things further. I think we've talked about some of these comments, but this was an interesting one. At Red Bull, everything was a problem. The team complained about everything. If I was faster, it was a problem, because then there would be like questions behind the scenes, what's going on, Jos Verstappen wouldn't be very happy, etc. It was a problem and it created a very tense environment. Now, of course, Perez wasn't often faster, but yes, still. If I was slower than Max, that was also a problem. I understood that these were the circumstances I was working in, and instead of complaining, I tried to make the best of it. But, it's interesting what he says, that if he was quicker than Max on occasion, that was problematic. But if he was slower, then also he's getting cooked as well internally. So this was a remarkable final comment, and actually not the final one, but at the moment I said to him, Christian, what are you going to do when it doesn't work out with Liam after he got the payoff from Red Bull? He replied that there was Yuki. And what are you going to do when it doesn't work out with Yuki? He replied, we have a lot of drivers. I told him he was going to use all of them, and he said, yes, I know. So that seems to sum it up rather well, that Horner, he understood that the way that Red Bull operate means that the second seat is going to get churned to high heaven. And a large part of that is that I think Max is just that good. But also there's clearly a significant component to that which comes from the way that Red Bull operate. And that is also very true when it comes to the way that decisions are made on the car. Tsunoda often talked about this, and look, it's true as far as we understand, that the drivers in the second seat, if it's clear that, Max obviously is their number one guy, if he's in some sort of a fight, they will be sacrificed from a setup learning perspective so it can help Max. If there's upgrades that need to be brought to one car, it's always going to go to Max's car. Not always the case at every other team. Certainly the case at Red Bull. Checo then says this. In Baku, this is, of course, 2024 he's talking about here, towards the end of his career. The team modifies the floor. They put it on mine, and I was a second faster than everyone. Now, okay, Baku is a circuit which naturally suits Perez's style very well. He likes a stable rear, he prefers more rear-limited circuits. Baku, it's a lot of 90-degree corners, it's very much rear-limited, circuits where Perez has generally gone better. Baku's his best track, nobody denies that. Now look, did they bring a flaw to his car that made him better in addition to that? Quite possibly. Remember 2024 Baku, Perez outqualified Max. He was on course to have a really, really good result. As he says, I was doing really well. I was going to win that race. Now, look, he wasn't going to win that race. And I'll show a screenshot of why in a second. But then he crashed into Sainz, right? Now, did he crash into Sainz? Sainz crashed into him. Kind of racing incident at the end of the day. I think both of them should have been more careful. Whatever, we talked about that a year and a half ago. Wrecked the car, and I never touched that floor again. And this is kind of the Red Bull criticism here, is he's like, well, look, because I had that issue and we crashed, so there are only a few races left. I never got to see that new floor. He is of the opinion, with a few races to go, who knows? Would I have been faster? This was the real sabotage comment. What would have happened if I had that car for the rest of the year? Who knows? And I think that things, or like those things, happen for a reason too. So the implication, I think, from Perez here is that had they given him the floor again, then he believes that he would have been just as fast, if not faster than Max, for them to the rest of the season. And Red Bull didn't want that to be the case, so they deliberately didn't give him the new floor so that he wouldn't be a threat to Max, as Max was obviously trying to hold on to his championship lead that he had. Look, that's going to be Perez's perspective as a competitor from Checo's side. Totally get it. Do I really buy some of what Perez is saying? Not necessarily. Like, when he talks about here that he was having a great race, which he was, but was he going to win? No. I mean, this is the screenshot of the time. This is lap 50, when Sainz and Perez are just crashing. Max is down in 7th. So, yeah, look, Perez is having a great time. And Leclerc's tyres at this point were cooked. But Piastri was also winning this race by 5 seconds, right? So Perez, like, even if Perez gets the overtake on Sainz here, and maybe he gets the overtake on Leclerc as well, he's still not winning the race. But anyway, this was certainly a key point of contention. He also went on to discuss that when he did the SF23 test recently with Cadillac, he realised that, damn, I'm hitting good times with this car, I can still do it. I was effectively getting costed by Red Bull, is the implication. So, look, I think that Perez strikes on a lot of points which definitely have basis in reality, right? Like, I think everyone knows that Red Bull favour Max. I don't think that Perez is revealing anything which is particularly outrageous. The implication that they've not given him the new upgrade so that he won't be competitive with Max definitely strikes me as an accusation of effectively sabotage and within the team. Do I really buy that? I think my general opinion on Perez and his stint at Red Bull especially is still that, while yes, that Red Bull definitely did not do as best as they could have done to help his side of the garage, but equally, I think sometimes there's more accountability to be taken, I think, from Perez's side on his own performance personally. And, he does like to play the victim a little bit. That's just my personal perspective. You might think that's a hot take, but I don't know. Like, when towards the end of the Red Bull stint, and now he's talking a similar thing. So look, we'll see how he gets on, right? Like, I'm excited to see his return to the sport. Very much intrigued to your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.